The air hung thick with the stench of old paper and stale coffee, the crimson ink still wet on the page as I stared at the words, each syllable a hammer blow against my skull. They thought they could bury the truth, lock it away in leather-bound silence, but here it was, screaming from the pages, a testament to their depravity and my father's stolen legacy. The book lay open on the podium, illuminated by the harsh spotlight, as the author, a smug smile plastered across his face, read aloud passages that were etched into my very soul, words that had been whispered in my childhood home, words that belonged to my father, not him. If you cherish the memory of your dear departed sister, subscribe to our family of storytellers now. My father, a man whose heart overflowed with stories, whose mind was a kaleidoscope of ideas, had always dreamed of sharing his creations with the world. He filled countless journals with his thoughts, his poems, his half-finished novels, each page a testament to his vibrant imagination. But he was a quiet soul, content to weave his tales in the privacy of his study, never seeking recognition, never pushing for publication. He trusted people too easily, and that was the first mistake. When he passed away unexpectedly, a void opened in my life, a gaping wound that time seemed unable to heal. I became the keeper of his dreams, the guardian of his legacy, poring over his journals, feeling his presence in every carefully crafted sentence. I knew his writing intimately, the rhythm of his prose, the cadence of his voice, the very essence of his being weaving into each word. So imagine my shock when, a year after his passing, I saw the announcement for a book reading by a debut author, a man named Julian Hayes, whose work was being hailed as a masterpiece of modern literature. Curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of hope that someone else might appreciate my father's genius, led me to the bookstore that evening. But the moment Julian Hayes began to read, a cold dread washed over me, a chilling premonition that something was terribly wrong. The words he spoke were my father's. The stories he told were the stories I had grown up with. The characters he described were the characters my father had created. It wasn't just inspiration, it was outright theft, a blatant and brazen act of intellectual robbery. My hands trembled as I gripped my purse, my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of disbelief and outrage churning within me. How could this happen? How could someone so casually steal another person's life work and present it as their own? The audacity of it took my breath away. I wanted to scream, to shout, to expose him then and there, but something held me back. A cold, calculating part of me knew that I needed proof, that I needed to gather evidence, that I needed to plan my next move carefully. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my anger, of witnessing my pain. I would bide my time. I would observe. I would wait for the perfect moment to strike back. So I sat there, silently seething, listening to him butcher my father's words, each sentence a fresh wound, each paragraph a deeper betrayal. He even adopted my father's mannerisms as he read, tilting his head in that familiar way, pausing for dramatic effect at the same points, like some kind of grotesque imitation. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew I couldn't let this stand, that I owed it to my father, to his memory, to his stolen dreams, to expose this fraud and reclaim what was rightfully his. But how? He had the book published, he had the critics raving, he had the world convinced that he was a literary genius. I was just a grieving daughter, armed with nothing but a handful of journals and a burning desire for justice. The person I trusted most was one of them. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I stumbled out of the bookstore, the city lights blurring into streaks of mocking neon. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. The stolen words echoed in my mind, a relentless chorus of injustice that kept me tossing and turning through the long, dark nights. Every attempt to find solace in my father's journals only deepened the wound, each familiar phrase now tainted by Julian Hayes' theft. I started small, contacting the publisher, hoping to reason with them, to present my evidence and appeal to their sense of ethics. I prepared a meticulous case, photocopies of my father's journals, highlighted passages that mirrored Hayes's book, a timeline of my father's life and work. But the publisher, a slick corporate entity, brushed me aside with practiced indifference. They claimed to have thoroughly vetted Hayes's manuscript, that they had no reason to doubt its originality. They implied that I was simply a grieving daughter, blinded by emotion, unable to accept that someone else could have similar ideas. Their words were like salt in an open wound, a blatant dismissal of my father's legacy and my own intelligence. Defeated but not broken, I turned to social media, hoping to find allies, to raise awareness about the plagiarism. I created a blog, posting excerpts from my father's journals alongside passages from Hayes's book, inviting readers to compare the writing styles to judge for themselves. But my efforts were met with skepticism and indifference. Hayes's publisher had deep pockets, and they quickly moved to discredit me, flooding the internet with positive reviews and articles praising his genius, burying my accusations beneath a mountain of fabricated praise. I even contacted a lawyer, hoping to pursue legal action, but I quickly discovered that proving plagiarism was a difficult and expensive undertaking. Hayes had subtly altered some of the passages, changed character names, and tweaked plot points just enough to create a veneer of originality.
The lawyer warned me that a lawsuit could drag on for years, costing me a fortune and ultimately ending in failure. The weight of it all was crushing. The constant struggle to be heard, the relentless pushback from Hayes's supporters, the gnawing fear that my father's legacy would be forever tarnished by this act of theft. The stress took its toll. My health deteriorated, my hair started to thin, and dark circles formed beneath my eyes. I isolated myself from friends and family, consumed by my obsession with exposing Hayes, neglecting everything else in my life. I was losing, slowly but surely, and the realization filled me with a cold, creeping despair. The person I trusted most was one of them. She had always been my confidant, my rock, the one person I could always count on to listen and offer support. Sarah, my cousin, had been my sister. I had shared everything with her, including my father's journals and my growing suspicions about Julian Hayes. She had been sympathetic, offering words of encouragement and helping me gather evidence. But then, one day, she changed. She became distant, evasive, and started questioning my motives. She suggested that I was being irrational, that I needed to let go of my obsession, that I was damaging my own life in the process. I brushed it off, assuming she was simply concerned for my well-being. But then, I overheard a phone conversation, a hushed exchange between her and someone else, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Julian Hayes's publicist. They were discussing my blog, my accusations, and how to discredit me further. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a crushing betrayal that left me reeling. Sarah was working with them, feeding them information, helping them to silence me. The pain was unbearable, a deep, agonizing wound that cut through my heart. I confronted her, of course, but she denied everything, claiming that I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. But I saw the truth in her eyes, the guilt, the deception, the cold, calculated betrayal. That was the moment I knew I was truly alone, that I couldn't trust anyone, that I had to fight this battle on my own. And that was the moment that the seed of revenge was planted. A dark, bitter seed that would slowly but surely blossom into a carefully crafted plan. I would not let them win. I would not let them bury my father's legacy. I would make them pay for what they had done. I just needed to find the right way, the right time, the right weapon to strike back. The walls of my apartment seemed to be closing in, the silence amplifying the constant thrumming in my ears, a relentless reminder of my failure. I was alone, truly alone, stripped bare of allies, hope, and even the will to fight. The stolen words haunted me, twisting into grotesque parodies of my father's beautiful prose. Every corner of my life was tainted by Julian Hayes's theft and Sarah's betrayal. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring. The apartment became a tomb, filled with the ghosts of my father's dreams and the echoes of my shattered trust.
One evening, I found myself staring at a bottle of pills, the promises of oblivion shimmering like a mirage in the dim light. The darkness whispered, tempting me to surrender, to silence the pain, to simply fade away. It would be so easy, a final escape from the relentless torment. I remember the feeling of the cool glass against my palm, the faint rattle of the pills inside, each one a potential key to unlocking the silence I craved. I raised the bottle to my lips, my hand trembling, my eyes squeezed shut. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a tiny spark of resistance against the encroaching darkness. It was a memory, a fleeting image of my father's face, his eyes filled with hope and pride as he read his stories to me, his voice resonating with passion and love. He had entrusted me with his legacy, with his dreams, and I had almost allowed them to be extinguished. I lowered the bottle, my hand shaking, tears streaming down my face. I would not give up. I would not let them win. I owed it to my father, to myself, to fight back, to reclaim what was rightfully ours. The pills clattered to the floor as I hurled the bottle against the wall, the shattering glass mirroring the fragments of my broken spirit. But amidst the wreckage, a new resolve began to form, a cold, unwavering determination to exact my revenge. I would no longer be a victim. I would become a strategist, a planner, a force to be reckoned with. Julian Hayes and Sarah would pay for their treachery, for stealing my father's legacy and betraying my trust. I would make them regret the day they crossed me. The first step was to gather information, to learn everything I could about Julian Hayes, his past, his weaknesses, his secrets. I would dig deep, unearthing every hidden truth, every buried scandal, every vulnerability that could be exploited. I would become a shadow, watching his every move, anticipating his every action, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I started by meticulously documenting every instance of plagiarism in Hayes's book, comparing it to my father's journals, creating a detailed dossier of his theft. I spent hours poring over old newspaper articles, online forums, and social media posts, searching for any hint of scandal or wrongdoing in his past.
I discovered that Hayes had a history of embellishing his achievements, of taking credit for other people's work, of manipulating and exploiting those around him. He was a fraud, a charlatan, a master of deception, and I would expose him for what he was. I also began to investigate Sarah, trying to understand why she had betrayed me, what she had gained from working with Hayes. I discovered that she had been struggling financially, that she was deeply in debt, and that Hayes had offered her a substantial sum of money to help him discredit me. She had chosen money over loyalty, greed over friendship. Her betrayal cut deep, but it also fueled my determination to make them both pay. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every email, every interaction, gathering evidence of their collusion, their lies, their deceit. I knew that I needed irrefutable proof to expose them, something that could not be denied or dismissed. I would be patient, methodical, and relentless in my pursuit of justice. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that I would simply fade away, defeated and broken. But they were wrong. I was stronger than they thought, more determined than they could imagine, and I would not rest until they had paid the price for their crimes. The air in the apartment felt different now, no longer heavy with despair, but charged with a cold, calculating energy. The darkness had not disappeared, but it had been transformed, channeled into a weapon, a tool for revenge. I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter, and the hunt had begun. I smiled. I played their game. I even accepted Sarah's insincere apologies, acting as though I believed her desperate denials. I met with Julian Hayes at a public book signing, extending my hand with forced pleasantry, congratulating him on his success. But beneath the surface, I was recording everything. I purchased a small, discreet voice recorder, concealing it in my purse, capturing every word, every nuance, every lie that dripped from his tongue. I knew that I needed more than just my word against his, that I needed concrete evidence to prove his plagiarism beyond any reasonable doubt. So I consulted with a forensic linguistics expert, a specialist in analyzing writing styles and identifying patterns of authorship.
I provided her with copies of my father's journals and Hayes's book, and she meticulously compared the two texts, identifying hundreds of instances of plagiarism, not just in the content, but also in the sentence structure, the vocabulary, and the overall writing style. Her report was damning, a detailed and irrefutable indictment of Hayes's theft. But I knew that even with this evidence, I would still face an uphill battle. Hayes's publisher had deep pockets and a powerful legal team, and they would do everything in their power to protect their investment.
I needed a strategy that would not only expose Hayes's plagiarism, but also neutralize the publisher's efforts to discredit me. I remembered my father telling me about copyright law, about intellectual property rights, about the importance of protecting one's creative work. I realized that Hayes had not only stolen my father's work, but had also violated his copyright, a crime that carried significant legal penalties. I consulted with a copyright lawyer who confirmed that Hayes's book was indeed a blatant infringement of my father's intellectual property rights. He advised me to file a cease and desist letter, demanding that Hayes and his publisher immediately stop selling the book and remove it from all online platforms. I knew that they would likely ignore the letter, but it was a necessary first step, a formal declaration of my intent to protect my father's legacy. The anticipation was building, a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I knew that the next few weeks would be crucial, that I needed to be prepared for anything. I started to document everything, every conversation, every email, every interaction, gathering evidence of their collusion, their lies, their deceit. I knew that I needed irrefutable proof to expose them, something that could not be denied or dismissed. I would be patient, methodical, and relentless in my pursuit of justice. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that I would simply fade away, defeated and broken. But they were wrong. I was stronger than they thought, more determined than they could imagine, and I would not rest until they had paid the price for their crimes. I also discovered that Julian Hayes had a secret bank account in the Cayman Islands, a stash of unreported income that he was using to evade taxes. This was the leverage I needed, the key to unlocking his carefully constructed facade. I contacted an investigative journalist, a woman known for her fearless reporting and her ability to expose corruption. I shared my evidence with her, including the forensic linguistics report, the copyright lawyer's opinion, and the information about Hayes's secret bank account. She was intrigued by the story and agreed to investigate further. Together, we crafted a plan to expose Hayes's plagiarism and his tax evasion to the world. We would publish an expose in a major newspaper, detailing his crimes and providing irrefutable evidence of his guilt. We would also alert the authorities about his secret bank account, triggering a criminal investigation that could lead to his arrest and prosecution. The plan was risky, but I knew that it was the only way to truly bring him down, to reclaim my father's legacy, and to exact my revenge. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. They basked in the glow of their manufactured success, blinded by their arrogance and their belief that they were above the law. They had underestimated me, dismissed me as a grieving daughter, too emotional and irrational to pose a real threat, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I made sure I had backups of everything, scattering digital copies of the evidence across multiple secure servers, ensuring that it could not be erased or destroyed. I even mailed a hard drive containing all of the information to a trusted friend, instructing her to release it to the media if anything happened to me. I wasn't taking any chances. I also began to prepare myself emotionally for the fallout, for the inevitable backlash from Hayes's supporters and the publisher's legal team. I knew that they would try to discredit me, to smear my reputation, to paint me as a vindictive and unstable woman. But I was ready for them. I had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. I was simply fighting for my father's legacy, for the truth, and for justice. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to see it through to the end. I would not rest until Julian Hayes and Sarah had paid the price for their treachery, until my father's name had been cleared, and until his stolen dreams had been reclaimed. The final piece of the puzzle was Sarah. Her betrayal stung the most, the wound festering with each passing day. I couldn't let her get away with it, with her complicity in Hayes's scheme, with her willingness to sell out our friendship for a few dollars. I decided to confront her one last time, to give her one final chance to come clean, to admit her wrongdoing, and to apologize for her betrayal. I invited her to my apartment, pretending that I wanted to mend our broken relationship.
I even cooked her favorite meal, hoping to create a sense of nostalgia and warmth. But as soon as she arrived, I confronted her with the evidence of her collusion with Hayes, the phone records, the emails, the bank statements. She denied everything at first, but when I presented her with irrefutable proof, she finally broke down, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. But it was too late. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. I told her that I could never forgive her, that her betrayal had caused irreparable damage to our relationship. I asked her to leave and never contact me again. As she walked out the door, I felt a pang of sadness, a fleeting moment of regret for what we had lost. But it was quickly replaced by a cold sense of satisfaction. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. The trap was ready to be sprung. Julian Hayes and Sarah were about to learn that revenge is a dish best served cold.
The day they betrayed me was the day revenge was born. They broke me. I stayed silent because the plan had begun. I said nothing. They thought I was done, but I was counting every second. The person I trusted most was one of them. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. The investigative journalist Maria confirmed my suspicions about Hayes' secret account. It was overflowing with royalties he hadn't reported, a clear case of tax evasion that could land him in serious trouble. She also uncovered a pattern of harassment suits from former employees, all quietly settled out of court with NDAs. Hayes thought he was so clever, burying his past misdeeds under layers of money and legal agreements. But Maria was relentless, digging deeper and unearthing the truth with surgical precision. We discovered that the publishing house was fully aware of Hayes' shady dealings, choosing to turn a blind eye as long as the money kept rolling in. They were complicit in his crimes, profiting from stolen work and silenced victims. This wasn't just about plagiarism anymore. It was about systemic corruption, a network of lies and deceit that reached the highest levels of the literary world. Maria arranged a meeting with several of Hayes' former employees, women who had been intimidated and silenced for years. They were terrified to speak out, afraid of the consequences, but Maria's unwavering support and the promise of anonymity gave them the courage to finally tell their stories. Their accounts were harrowing, painting a picture of Hayes as a manipulative and abusive predator who used his power and influence to exploit those around him. This story was explosive, a powder keg waiting to ignite. Maria scheduled the article to be published in the Sunday edition of the New York Chronicle, guaranteeing maximum exposure and impact. The headline alone would send shockwaves through the literary community. Best-selling author exposed as plagiarist, tax evader, and abuser. I leaked snippets of the story to social media, creating a buzz and generating anticipation for the full exposé. The internet was already buzzing with speculation and rumors, and Hayes' carefully constructed image was beginning to crumble. I knew that he would try to do damage control, to deny the allegations and discredit the sources, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the truth was undeniable. The trap was set. Now all that was left was to lure him in. I contacted Hayes under the guise of wanting to bury the hatchet. I told him that I had been misguided and that I was willing to consider a settlement if he made a substantial donation to a charity in my father's name. I laid it on thick, playing the part of the grieving daughter, desperate for closure. He ate it up. His ego was so inflated that he actually believed I would back down. He agreed to meet me at a secluded restaurant outside the city, thinking that he could intimidate me into signing a non-disclosure agreement. He even brought Sarah along as his witness, a final act of cruelty that sealed their fate. As they sat across from me, smug and self-assured, I could barely contain my contempt. I smiled sweetly, feigning vulnerability, as I led them into my carefully orchestrated trap. The restaurant was strategically chosen for its proximity to the New York Chronicles printing press. As we talked, Maria and her team were working tirelessly to finalize the article, ensuring that every detail was accurate and every allegation was substantiated. At exactly 8 p.m., the presses would start rolling, and the truth about Julian Hayes would be revealed to the world. I glanced at my watch, the seconds ticking by like a countdown to detonation. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Hayes launched into a condescending speech about forgiveness and moving on, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Sarah sat beside him, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She knew that something was wrong, that I was playing a game, but she couldn't quite figure out what it was.
I let them ramble on, savoring their ignorance and their impending downfall. I waited for the perfect moment, the precise instant when the first copies of the New York Chronicle hit the streets. And then my phone rang. It was Maria. "It's done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The presses are rolling." I looked at Hayes and Sarah, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. "Check your phones," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "The truth is out." The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. Hayes scoffed, pulling out his phone with a dismissive wave. Sarah followed suit, her fingers trembling as she unlocked her screen. The color drained from their faces as they scrolled through the digital version of the New York Chronicle. I watched their expressions morph from arrogance to disbelief, then to stark terror. Hayes's face contorted in a grotesque mask of fury and panic. He sputtered, trying to deny the accusations, to dismiss them as fake news, but the words caught in his throat, choked by the weight of the evidence. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to deflate before my very eyes.
The realization of what they had done, the consequences they were about to face, crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Her carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. The restaurant, once filled with the murmur of polite conversation, seemed to fall silent, all eyes drawn to our table. I could feel the stares, the whispers, the collective shock rippling through the room. Hayes lunged across the table, his eyes blazing with rage, his hand outstretched as if to silence me. But I was ready for him. I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering, my voice steady as I spoke. "It's over, Julian," I said. "Your lies are exposed. Your secrets are out. There's nowhere left to run." He froze, his hand hovering in midair, his bravado suddenly gone. He knew that I was right. The game was up. The police arrived moments later, alerted by an anonymous tip. Mine. They escorted Hayes out of the restaurant in handcuffs, his face buried in his hands, his career, his reputation, his life in ruins. Sarah watched him go, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. She knew that she was next. The fallout was swift and brutal. Hayes's book was immediately pulled from shelves, his publishers scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. His agent dropped him, his friends deserted him, and his name became synonymous with dishonesty and deceit. The harassment allegations surfaced, and other women came forward, emboldened by the New York Chronicle exposé. Hayes was facing multiple lawsuits, a criminal investigation for tax evasion, and the utter destruction of his carefully built empire. Sarah was not spared. She was fired from her job, ostracized by her peers, and haunted by the guilt of her betrayal. The friendship we once shared was irrevocably broken, replaced by a chasm of resentment and regret. She tried to reach out, to apologize, to explain, but I refused to listen. Her words were hollow, her excuses meaningless. The damage was done. The truth had emerged, and justice had been served. My father's name was cleared. His legacy was restored. His stolen work was finally recognized. It was not a joyful moment, but a necessary one. A weight lifted from my shoulders, a sense of closure settling over my heart. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. They lost everything. I just smiled. The crimson that stained their lies faded. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's the act of reclaiming what was unjustly taken, of restoring balance to a world that has been thrown off its axis. It's not about seeking pleasure in another's suffering, but about ensuring that justice prevails. My father always taught me that some things are worth fighting for, that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and in this case, silence was not an option. I honored his memory, and in doing so, I honored myself. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.